Our next speaker, everybody knows quite well, Dr. Steve Souza. He's going to be talking about stormwater management, specifically water runoff. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Steve.
Thank you.
You can mount that.
Okay. So it's great to be back up here again, and first off, thanks to New Jersey Coalition of Lake Associations for having me today, and also to the Lake Mohawk Country Club. I always love coming up to Lake Mohawk. Those of you that may not know me, I'm a lake manager. I've probably worked on about 300 lakes throughout the Northeast, and the majority of all of the major lakes in New Jersey and major water supply reservoirs as well. Been doing work with Culver Lake, White Meadow Lake, Lake Mohawk, going all the way back to the 1980s, Deal Lake Commission as well. Past president of North American Lake Management Society, past president of the Pennsylvania Lake Management Society, and I was the founder and owner of Princeton Hydro from its inception until I retired in 2018. So that's me. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about stormwater management. This is going to be sort of stormwater management 101. And then I'm going to show you some examples, that maybe address some of the issues that Anthony had brought up before, maybe give you some ideas of things that potentially you could be doing around your lake community. So, all right, so it's a little bit of runoff. Yeah, when we see, pictures like this that goes back, I think this is Hurricane Ida up in Jersey City. But, it's a lot more than just a little bit of runoff. And if you look at what is impairing the nation's waters, about 75% of all of the waters in this country are still impaired. And the cause for those impairments are a result of non-point source pollution, and that non-point source pollution is mobilized and transported by stormwater runoff. So, like I said, I've studied numerous lakes, and I can say definitively for non-sewered lakes, lakes in non-sewered watersheds, okay, you have septic systems. Stormwater runoff accounts for about 40 to 50% of the annual amount of phosphorus that enters your lake. And then when you have a sewered watershed, the numbers jump up even more significantly. There's 70 to 90% of that phosphorus that enters your lake on an annual basis originates as stormwater runoff. So it is a big deal, and it's a big deal for lakes because the eutrophication of lakes, what makes our lakes greener, more algae blooms, more harmful algae blooms, even more plant growth, is all directly linked to phosphorus. And when you look at the concentration of phosphorus in stormwater runoff, it easily averages around 0.3 milligrams per liter, okay? That's tenfold more than what is enough to stimulate and sustain a harmful algae bloom, okay? And that's with every single storm. That stormwater runoff has concentrations from about 0.275 to even greater than 0.5 milligrams per liter. That's a lot of phosphorus that's entering your lake with every storm event. So as a result of that, and this has been sort of like, a common thread with my recommendations for all lakes, is that you have to manage stormwater runoff. Managing runoff results in less phosphorus. Less phosphorus means your lake is not eutrophying as quickly, means that you're not seeing as much algal productivity. Less algae blooms, less infilling from sediment, things like that. So as a result, stormwater management has to be a foundation of every single lake management and restoration plan. That has to be your foundation because it's your biggest source of problem. So why does this happen? So I'm not talking undeveloped watersheds, I'm talking minimally developed watersheds, okay? On every time it rains in a watershed that has not been extensively developed, only about 10% of that precipitation actually emulates as runoff, okay? The majority of it gets absorbed back into the ground or is absorbed by plants and is lost via evapotranspiration. So only 10% of that precipitation, because there's not a lot of impervious cover, so the ground can soak it up, the plants can take it up, and you're not generating a lot of runoff. But when we flip the table, what ends up happening is that now about 55% of that precipitation generates runoff. Okay, so that's a big, big difference. And you're probably saying, okay, well, you know, I have to have development on the, like something that I would see in Newark or in Camden. No, that's not the case. You start to see these problems with impervious cover of only 10 to 20%. What does that equate to? That equates to 1 house per acre. Okay, that's suburbia, all right? Not urban land, suburbia. So you start to see these problems with minimal amount of development. And that's why our lakes are subject to so much phosphorus loading and why we're subject to these problems with harmful algae blooms and extensive productivity. Okay, so Sabine knows all of this stuff, and I'm sure there's a lot of others in here that know this, but the problem with development on watersheds, okay, is that you end up generating more runoff, but that leaves the land and enters the stream or enters your lake, the stream that feeds your lake or directly into your lake. That runoff is generated earlier in the storm. It's generated at a higher rate, so it starts to mobilize and transport more pollutants. And there's an increase in volume, and that's the big thing, because volume is our problem, okay? We can control the rate of runoff very easily. I'll show you some examples. However, volume is something that is very difficult to control, particularly with our state's stormwater regulations. Our regulations are primarily rate-based, not volume-based, okay? So as you get more impervious cover, you generate more runoff, it gets to my lake much more quickly, it mobilizes more pollutants, and I have more coming into my lake, all right? So that results in this sort of like cascading effect where I change the land use within my watershed, okay? That results in a change in hydrology. When we talk about hydrology, we're talking about volume. It also changed the hydraulics of that runoff. When we talk about hydraulics, it's how fast that water is coming at me. So it's volume and rate. You end up with more runoff, you end up with more pollutant loading, that accelerates eutrophication, and then all these other problems that we see: impacted lake use, degraded aesthetics, harmful algae blooms, and the cost to manage our lakes, all right? All because of a little bit of runoff, all right? Now, as I said, our state, the stormwater regulations, although they have been modified repeatedly, and they were modified significantly just this past year, it's still primarily rate-based. And the way most engineers have been taught to deal with runoff is to think of it as a waste. It's a waste product. So what do I do with it? I try to collect it and concentrate it as quickly as I can. If I have, in some cases, I may have a basin that it gets routed to. It's held in that basin for a given amount of time, and then it's released, okay? But in most cases, it's routed to a detention basin, and we'll see, like with detention basins of like the old school design, you have minimal opportunity for pollutant removal, you have minimal opportunity for recharge, and yeah, I can hold the water back, but I'm not decreasing volume. So the fallacy with detention, which is the standard approach that engineers continue to utilize to manage runoff in this state, is to collect it, hold it, and then get rid of it, all right? But when you have a basin like that, and how many of you have basins like this in your watershed? Have you gone around and taken a look with like a concrete low flow channel, they're mowed, there's not a lot of vegetation in there? Those basins have a compacted bottom, because of the way they've been constructed. So the soil is compacted. That impedes recharge. It's covered with grass. The roots on lawn grass is about 1/2 inch. That's about it. So again, there's no way to really help that collective runoff permeate down into the soil. And in addition to that, because it's just plain old lawn grass, there's no filtering, there's minimal opportunity for bioassimilation of any of those nutrients. And so, yeah, this can do a really good job at detaining flow, but it doesn't do a really good job at treating stormwater, and that's what we really need, okay? All right, so what can we do? So there are a lot of things that we can do. Some of these fall on our own shoulders, and some of them can be done on a community scale, either with or without the cooperation of a municipality, okay? So I'm always a big advocate. Number one, you know, it's my problem. Let me see what I can do to solve my own problem. And I try to divide stormwater management into 2 categories: source control activities and delivery control. So with source control, what I'm trying to do is prevent the problem from happening in the first place or decrease the problem. And that means, like for instance, I'm going to decrease the amount of phosphorus, nitrogen, and sediment that's coming off of my property. My own property or like the Lake Association's property. I'm also going to look at ways on my own property to decrease the amount of runoff that's leaving my site. I want to embrace that. I want to think of stormwater as something that's beneficial. It's not a waste, it's a resource. I want to hold on to that as opposed to just pushing it off and making it somebody else's problem, like has been the problem that Anthony was talking about. You know, we don't want that. In addition to that, then, there are ways that you can collect and better manage that runoff, and that happens through delivery control, where I'm going to use structures to intercept that runoff and either treat it before it's released, so I decrease pollutant load, sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus, or I can hold it and maybe decrease volume. And that's the key. At the end of the day, you decrease volume, you decrease pollutants, you decrease the rate, the amount of water that's being released from my site. And even if I'm controlling that rate, I'm still decreasing how much is running down that stream or running into my lake and causing those erosion problems that we saw. So, and if anybody has questions as I move through this, you know, feel free to, you know, put your hand up and I'll try to address them. Okay. So this is sort of like self-help. What can I do to help myself? So source control strategies, and this is something I know most of the lake associations have newsletters, you know, they have social media means by which to engage the community. Although in New Jersey since 2012, over-the-counter fertilizer does not have any phosphorus in it, landscape firms can get exemptions to apply phosphorus to lakeside lawns. And if somebody wants to take a trip over to PA, they can go over to Pennsylvania and get over-the-counter fertilizer with phosphorus in it. But phosphorus is our biggest enemy. So if anything that I can do to avoid the application of lawn fertilizer is going to help me in the long run. And I'm going to give you some, sources of information that you can go to. But one of the ways of decreasing the amount of fertilizer use is to keep your lawns aerated and keep them lined. Why lined? The pH of rainfall, as you know, is on the acidic side. As soils become more acidic, it's more difficult for the plants that are growing in that soil to uptake phosphorus. So the way to do that is to add lime and increase the pH of that soil. So it's an old school trick, it works really well, but it avoids the need for applying phosphorus-based fertilizer. Also, aerating lawns maintain porosity in that soil and helps a lot of the rainfall to percolate down into the soil, be in contact with the roots of the plants, and that also helps uptake more of the natural phosphorus that's in our soils. Other things that can be done, you can convert lawns to alternative covers. I don't live on a lake. I have about a half-acre lot, and it takes me probably about 20 minutes to mow my lawn with a push mower, okay? Why? Because I've created a whole bunch of rain gardens on my property, and I've gotten rid of a lot of my lawn and replaced it with alternative ground covers, wildflower beds and things like that. It's a great way of decreasing runoff. Less runoff, less problem, okay? Easy thing to do. For whatever reason, we've been sort of like brainwashed that we need these big rolling lawns. Why? They don't really accomplish much. And then we can also look for ways, and I'll show you some examples of swapping out existing impervious surfaces for pervious surfaces, okay? Getting that water, again, to soak into the ground. Controlling erosion, that's a problem, but if you have bare soil on your lot, I mean, it doesn't take too much to figure out why it's bare and then how to correct that. It may be an alternative cover, it may be having to deal with some runoff. And then disconnecting impervious surfaces. I had mentioned before NJAC 7:13 and NJAC 7:8, which is the stormwater rules. Within those rules themselves, DEP talks about the importance of disconnecting impervious from pervious. What does that mean? Well, if I have a lawn, okay, and I've got sheet flow coming across that lawn, and then it comes to my driveway, okay, now all of that runoff from the lawn is connected to the impervious surface of my driveway. It hits the driveway, it runs off, it goes down into the street. Well, I could do something to maybe disconnect that runoff, that sheet flow, by intercepting it with a little swale or maybe like a vegetated buffer to collect that and decrease the volume of runoff that hits that driveway and runs off of my property. So it's common sense stuff, but DEP actually requires that as part of like new development and also as part of that MS4 compliance, that municipal separate storm sewer requirement to disconnect impervious and impervious surfaces. And then other things that can be done, and this is part of MS4 compliance as well, proper management of yard waste and pet waste. And then also geese. And I know, you've heard me talk about geese before. I'm gonna leave you with this little tidbit that you can go back and impress everybody with. 4 geese in one day produce as much phosphorus as 1 septic system, okay? So just chew on that for a little bit. All right?
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else has figured this one out. We figured it out because our kids were playing around with green lasers. You know the light pens you can buy on the internet? They are amazing at getting rid of geese.
Same in Lake Stockholm.
The geese in the lake at nighttime, they all huddle together to stay away from the fox or whatever. You go out there at night, shine it, they don't have eyelids, they can't close their eyes, they get hit in those eyes with that green laser, the entire flock disappears, they're gone.
They think it's a predator.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Just a
that is a good tool. It has been used pretty successfully. Charlie? Yeah.
Steve, what is that regulation disconnecting impervious and pervious surface?
Okay, for new development, it would be found in New Jersey Administrative Code 7:8, which is the stormwater rules. Okay, and for existing development and for compliance with MS4, that's in 7:13. New Jersey Administrative Code 7:13. I'm sorry, 7:15. 7:13 is flood control. It's 7:15, okay? That's the municipal stormwater rules. NJAC 7:15, not 13. Jerry?
Steve, I'm sure this wasn't on your agenda, but perhaps for organizations that have large and vast asphalt parking lots, do you endorse the impervious lots, not changing the gravel, but the one that has holes drilled in it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, well, I'll definitely get into that when I talk about like some delivery control strategies, but absolutely. Is anybody here from Mountain Lakes? Okay.
You have to work Saturdays to pay their taxes.
Okay. Because I mean, I know they modified their parking lot to a pervious surface not too long ago. All right, and then these are delivery controls. So here, just to recap, these are things that we can do to lessen pollutant loading and lessen volume of runoff on our own. This is stuff things that we can do ourselves to help ourselves out. This is delivery control. Now I've got the problem. I've generated the runoff. What do I do with it? All right. And so for lake communities, it really means intercepting and managing that runoff before it gets discharged into a storm sewer, into a stream, or directly into my lake. And there's plenty of examples. I'm sure you guys have heard. Probably you've had Nathaniel here, and he's talked about rain gardens or Chris Abrupta. But these are all strategies that can definitely be used on individual lots and then on a community scale. So I'm going to go through all of these things and show you examples of all of these. Okay, so this has been sort of like my mantra, and hopefully there's a few takeaways that you can use as well when you think about managing stormwater within your community, all right? And the first thing is that stormwater is a resource, it's not a waste. So when you think of it from that standpoint, I'm going to try to find ways to hold on to that, onto my property, as long as I can, okay? Or if it's communal property, on that property as long as I can. I don't want that runoff entering my lake without opportunity for infiltration, recharge, and treatment. So number one, it's a resource, not a waste. I'm going to show you how to turn down the volume, because that volume is what kills. If we can reduce volume, inherently you reduce the amount of load. Load is just a function of concentration times volume. If I reduce volume, even if I haven't reduced the concentration of pollutants in that stormwater runoff, I've reduced the amount that's reaching my lake, okay? It only makes sense. And then I will show you about why it's important to be dealing with the small storms, which probably a lot of you it'll be mind-boggling when I tell you what the state thinks of as a small storm, all right? And then we'll look at how to really divide and conquer runoff and then use nature as a model. Okay, so I've already talked about this, the importance of embracing and keeping as much runoff on site as possible, but there are techniques, which I'll show you examples of, where we can reuse, recharge, and retain runoff on our properties, okay? So instead of being programmed just to get rid of that, let's look at ways that we can do that. And there's a lot of examples that are called green infrastructure stormwater management techniques. They use vegetation and soils in combination to really decrease runoff volume and keep runoff on site as long as possible. And those techniques really help turn down the volume. And it's, I'll say it once and I'll say it multiple times, it's the volume that's the problem, okay? And so anything that we can do to put water into the ground or harvest it and retain it, you may think, okay, if I have a rain barrel, that's only 100 gallons, okay? However, that's 100 less gallons that ends up into my lake. And I can use that to water my vegetable gardens or flower beds or whatever, and that's 100 gallons less of water that's coming out of my well, or water that I'm paying for as part of my monthly utility bill. So there are benefits that are beneficial from a cost saving standpoint, as well as from a stormwater management standpoint. Now, this is what is a big part of the problem with the way engineers and the way the rules are written in dealing with stormwater runoff, okay? Number one, in New Jersey, because this is a developed state, a lot of the development actually occurred, particularly in this part of the state, in central New Jersey, maybe not so much in South Jersey, but definitely central and North Jersey. The majority of the development occurred prior to 1975. What's the importance of that? Well, up until then, New Jersey did not have any stormwater regulations at all. So somebody built, it could be a parking lot, it could be an Acme, it could be whatever, and there was no need to manage any of that runoff. It would just be discharged into a storm sewer system and then, on its merry way to a stream, wherever, okay? The thing is, even now, New Jersey's focus is really on the larger events, what's called the 2, 10, and 100, or more correctly referred to as the 50%, 10%, and 1% storms. A lot of the damage, though, that occurs is a result of smaller events, much, much smaller events. Okay, so if you look at the New Jersey stormwater management rules, in terms of rate control only applies to the 2, 10, and 100-year events. The 1-year storm is considered the water quality event. There are some requirements now to intercept that and manage it with green infrastructure to decrease volume, but those regulations went into effect in 2023. Okay, anybody want to guess when I talk about the 1-year event? So this is a storm that has a 100% chance of occurring any 1 year, okay? How many inches of rainfall over 24 hours? Does anybody want to take a guess what DEP kind of considers an insignificant storm, and most stormwater engineers consider it an insignificant storm?
2 inches.
Good answers, okay? About 2.75 to 3 inches of rainfall over 24 hours. Today, okay? How many events do we get that are even less than that, though, that still generate runoff and still create problems, all right? And this is where the death by 1,000 cuts comes in, okay? So one of the things, how many are familiar with Dr. Chris Abrupto? Few of you, okay. So he's with Rutgers Extension Service. He has worked with a lot of lake communities. I know, like with Lake Owassa and Lake Mohawk, a number of different lake communities in promoting green infrastructure on a small footprint type of scale. But although this looks like a busy slide, what I want you to take a look at is really with this. If I just collected and maintained on my property all of the runoff that's generated by 1 inch of rainfall, okay? Now you're talking about 1/3 of the water quality event, all right? But those rainfall events of that magnitude are occurring probably every other week, all right? I manage all of that runoff. If I do that, I am easily decreasing by 50% the runoff volume that's entering my lake from my property, okay? That's mind-boggling. 1 inch of rainfall, I can easily collect that and keep it on my property. I can start managing the 1-year storm. Now this is a much more volume, but like for instance on my lot, 1/2 acre, typical suburban level of development, that generates maybe about 15,000 gallons of runoff. I can control that. That's like about equivalent to a above ground pool. I can actually store that on my property and keep that on my property. If everybody was doing that, that would reduce the amount of the volume of runoff entering our streams and entering our lakes by 93%, okay? By managing in totality, the runoff volume from a 1-year storm. Now, you're thinking, well, it's not easy to do. It isn't, but it can be done, all right? So we'll look at some examples, because that's what really comes down to. All of you know that our lakes did not get eutrophic overnight. This has been a slow process, and it's death by 1,000 cuts. Well, death by 1,000 cuts to address that, you need 1,000 Band-Aids. And so all of these little things that can be done within your lake community does have a big positive benefit in the long run. It does take a village. It takes everybody working together to accomplish that, but it can be done. Yes?
So I get that the municipalities are not getting involved, and I get in my community we have a lot of challenges. 20s community, and it was built for 3 months of summer residents, and now people live there. They've changed their leach fields, and all. It is what it is. But as a private community, do we have an opportunity to implement our own corporation type of regulations for water waste management?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can do that in your bylaws, you can do that as part of just a, you know, like encourage I mean, because the more time that you spend on decreasing that volume of runoff that goes into your lake, that's less money that you're spending on maintaining the lake.
And if you're not mandatory membership, but they live within the boundaries, how does that work?
Well, that gets a little bit trickier, but sometimes you have to shame everybody into doing the right thing, you know? So, no, but I mean, that has been one of the big messages with green infrastructure, trying to demonstrate that it's an attractive alternative to standard stormwater management practices.
So we have situations where there are still some properties with cesspools.
Yeah, well, that's a whole different problem.
And the town won't take action on any of it, unless somebody moves, but they
Right,
don't need.
yeah.
So my question is, that's what I'm trying to get to, can the community itself, as the corporation, implement code that you have to come up with code?
I'm not a lawyer, so that's something you'd have to really ask, you know, an attorney if you could have the legal basis to do that. But I mean, lake associations and lake, you know, private lake communities they have bylaws that people need to comply with. You know, for instance, like a mandatory septic pump out. You know, that's not a state regulation, but you know, a lot of communities have adopted that, and that's part of the bylaws. So I can see, you know, a requirement, you know, like that. But it would take education to go hand in hand with it, to explain why, what the benefit is to the individual, and what the benefit is to the community.
Fair, thank you.
Okay. So in any event, you know, and this is one of the key things with green infrastructure, why it works so well, is that I don't need a big centralized basin. I don't need one of those big 8-foot deep detention basins where I'm routing everything to. I can start right on my own property. And so like I said, at my house, every single liter that comes off of my roof goes into a little rain garden. And I live in Hunterdon County. I've got really clay soils. I've amended those soils over the years with a lot of organic material to help them be more permeable. But it's an easy thing to do. And like I said, I don't live on a lake, and I just do it because if I'm going to talk the talk, I better walk the walk, as they say. So these are easy things to do. But when you start linking all of those things together, you end up creating a treatment train. And again, go into Administrative Code 7:8 and New Jersey's Stormwater Management Manual that is supported by that administrative code. And DEP themselves talks about divide and conquer, using small footprint best management practices to collect, store, treat, and then release stormwater runoff or put it back down into the ground. And then you can create these treatment trains where you have a whole bunch of linked little basins, little rain gardens, etc., swales that are all working in concert with each other. There's plenty of examples. I'm going to show you some examples that you can go to. But that is the beauty of green infrastructure, and that's why green infrastructure, these rules that were just updated in New Jersey, mandates now that every new development, before they do any type of rate management, they have to be doing green infrastructure. Why? To reduce the volume of runoff. And that's dealing with the 1-year storm. You're not building green infrastructure, for instance, for like, you know, a large amount of drainage. Most of these BMPs that fall into that category of green infrastructure can only manage up to 3 to 5 acres of runoff. Okay, so they're designed to be small, interlinked, and then work in concert with each other. That whole concept of 1,000 Band-Aids. And then with green infrastructure, we're using a combination of soil and vegetation. It's just not vegetation. So it's not just I dig a hole, I plant a bunch of plants in it, and I cross my fingers. You know, you have to have the hydrology, the soils, and the vegetation all working together. But when done correctly, you can significantly reduce the volume of runoff entering your lake. All right? And these are perfect strategies for lake communities. So what I'm going to do is show you some examples of green infrastructure that can be done on a single lot application and also on a community-based application, including, actual projects implemented with private money as well as public money throughout the state. So the first thing, this gets back to what I could do on my home base that probably is not even going to cost me much money. So one of my lake clients, she came up with this term lazy landscaping, which I loved, okay? And essentially what I'm going to do is, number one, wherever I have lawn, I'm going to look for ways to decrease lawn. And if I lived on a lake, I wouldn't want to be spending my Saturdays and Sundays mowing. I want to spend my Saturdays and Sundays enjoying the lake. So why have all this expansive lawn? But in any event, alternative ground covers, decrease the amount of turf in lawn. Avoid fertilizer and pesticide applications. In most cases, you don't really need any of that by aerating and liming your lawns. And especially for lakefront properties, do shoreline buffering. And I'm going to show you examples of that. And then we have the opportunity to collect and hold on-site runoff. So rainwater harvesting, even though each one of those barrels may only store 50 to 100 gallons of runoff, that's 50 to 100 less that's entering my lake. Okay? Those of you that know Chris Abrupta, he calls rain barrels like the gateway drug to stormwater management. People do this on an individual basis, or they do it on a community basis. It's a scout project or whatever. And then all of a sudden everybody's, okay, that's not too bad, I can do that. And then, oh, what's this stuff about rain gardens? Oh, maybe I'll do that as well. So it becomes like sort of like an entry into on-lot individual stormwater management. Rain gardens, we've heard about these. I mean, the key thing here is just to keep in mind, there's plenty of examples, the primary things to keep in mind that the soils, and this is the specification, this is the state specification, okay, for rain gardens. So this is not just like something that I made up. If you go into those regulations and you go into the BMP manual, this is what they talk about. A very, very sandy soil. So up here, we don't have, some of our soils can be pretty clayey, can be pretty compact. If you're going to build a rain garden, it's important to either replace that soil with this sandy soil mix, which is almost the same thing as what you would use to build a septic field, or you start to augment your native soils with organic material. Don't mix your native soils with sand, okay? Because what happens is you put the sand in with these clay or silty soils, and then instead of maintaining the porosity that the sand provides, all of those little gaps and holes get filled up by the clay and by the silts. The key thing is to put more organic material, peat moss, rotted leaf litter, things like that, that ends up creating more of an actual growing media under the ground, where now you can get earthworms and other organisms to keep those soils permeable. But this is like right out of the stormwater manual, okay? Guidance for individual rain gardens, right? And if you even want more design, you can download this document. This is from Rutgers. I've provided you with the link to that PDF with, and this is Chris Abrupta's, baby, but, basically this manual will tell you how to compute the size of the rain garden that you need, okay, how big, how deep it needs to be, the correct type of soils, and it'll provide you with a whole variety of plants that you can use successfully in those rain gardens. And then additionally, there's an app for this, believe it or not, okay? So University of Connecticut has this great app. I've got it on my phone. You can go onto your own property, identify, what type of, soils you have. It will provide you with guidance in terms of, again, the basics, how to design it, what plants to, put in the system, what's going to work where it's a little bit drier as opposed to a little bit wetter. One thing to keep in mind with rain gardens, because they're designed to deal with like those more frequently occurring events, but they're also designed to put water into the ground, not to keep it like there in a flooded condition. You're going to be dealing with plants that are more drought tolerant than wet tolerant. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. They like to be inundated and be saturated for a while, but for the most part, they're going to be probably pretty dry in those little rain gardens. Okay, so it's something to keep in mind. But anyhow, this app is another great way of providing with guidance on how to build a rain garden, what to put in it, and how to maintain it as well. Dry wells, I have one at my house that I put in. I put that in. I moved into that house in '82. Probably put that in around like '86 or so. It only deals with one of my roof leaders. And it was like one of my first forays into doing stormwater management. And I have clay soils, but these can work. I'm not going to be able to put in all of the runoff from my lot into this. It would surcharge. But for a small amount of roof runoff, it does a great job of getting rid of that, puts it back down into the ground. Yes?
How often do you have to clean out your sedimentation chamber?
I haven't cleaned it out since I put it in, and it keeps working. I've got one leader that comes into it. I do have that leader going through some vegetation before it gets to that, my infiltration pit. But the infiltration pit, similar to that example, was basically just a plastic container, probably, maybe about like 5 feet in diameter, and maybe only about 3 feet deep. Not easy to get through soils in Hunterdon County. But I put that in, filled it up with ballast, with rock, and I did wrap it with geotextile fabric, though, too, to keep fines from getting into the device. But I've never cleaned the thing out, and it continues to work fine. Okay. But if you had to, you could, I could find the top to it and dig it out, or like jet vac it out or something like that, if need be. But in any event, that's another little technique that can be used. That separation of pervious and impervious surfaces. So here's a perfect example. I have, like I told you, with the driveway. I have a driveway, it drains off of the lawn, it's adjacent to my lawn, the water draining off my lawn hits the driveway. I can intercept that. I've done that at my house too. I just have probably, it's about a 5-foot wide flower bed that just runs down along the side of the driveway. And I got a couple of places where people can walk through, so they would walk through the flower bed. But it's an easy solution to grab some of that runoff and deal with that, as opposed to just transferring it on top of my driveway and then exiting, my property. And then pervious surfaces, yes, there's been a lot done over the past 2 decades with pervious concrete, pervious macadam, and pavers. But any way that you could utilize those types of surfaces to, rather than just sheet flow water off, put it back down into the ground. There's a lot of examples of how these pervious pavements have been utilized. I got a couple of 319 projects where I actually got funding to do that on larger municipal lots as part of a 319H funded lake restoration program. But these work really well. They do require specialized maintenance. They need to be vacuumed. On these larger applications, they do need to be vacuumed a couple of times a year. Obviously, you're not going to put seal coat on top of your porous concrete or pervious macadam, because that'll defeat the purpose. But they do need specialized maintenance, and that's some of the pushback that you get from towns. They don't want to do that specialized maintenance, so it's easier just to put in the old school surfaces. But these are easy to implement measures. I know for a while I was the stormwater consultant to Mendon Township, and when people would come in for a permit to do, say, like a patio, a new patio, the town required it be done with some type of pervious surface to decrease the amount of runoff being generated from that site. So it was like, sort of like I scratch my back, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The permit required pervious surface for that new patio, and that was so that there was less runoff going into the street, which meant the DPW wasn't coming out and dealing with localized flooding problems on, frequent basis. Yeah, Mike?
Now, in a big parking lot, like you're familiar with our beaches, could something like that be done on like the downhill side of like maybe 50 feet or 100 feet, so when the water's sheeting off the parking lot, then it hits the pervious?
You could actually do that. It's going to take some hydrologic analysis though, because you've got to slow that water down enough, and you've got some pretty steep slopes on in some of those parking lots.
Right.
But you could do that, and you'll see that a lot of the applications with pervious pavement, a lot of times they'll just do, for instance, the drive aisles and not do the parking spaces, okay, with pervious pavement. And the concept there is that the turning into those parking spots start to disturb the pervious pavement a lot more than just driving over it, okay? But there's different techniques, but it does require some engineering analysis to find out how big, but you need to slow that water down too at the same time.
How deep is the base? Because you couldn't just mill and do that. You'd have to get down to this.
Yeah, so that's all going to be a function of the type of parking lot you have, how much like the weight, yeah, that's kind of stuff like that. But for pervious pavement compared to conventional pavement, if you look at those cross sections, they're the same. You still have a choker, layer, and then it's really the difference may just be in the thickness of the surface layer. But how far down you go and the depth or the thickness of that choker layer is about the same for pervious as opposed to impervious pavement. But these are examples, and then kind of like getting back to alternative covers. Whoop, I'm sorry.
Go back to the left.
Yep.
The bottom right-hand corner, what is that black cap?
Okay, so this is really cool stuff. So what this is an example. So this is a grid, all right? It's a plastic grid, and then you fill this grid up with crushed stone. So essentially what it does is provide you with a stable base within which to put your stone. And so this is a trick that you can use this on parking lots. You can use that on like patios, okay? And so you basically, you excavate, those grids are probably about, maybe about 4 to 6 inches in depth, and then they're just filled with your gravel. Okay. And then I've already mentioned, the alternative covers, but although it's Ocean County Soil Conservation District, go to that website, go to their website, because they have techniques that are applicable for every part of the state, all right? Yes, they have sandy soils down in Ocean County. However, they have been a huge proponent of alternative ground covers and techniques that can be used as a way of decreasing runoff. So check out that website. There's a great bunch of information there. And those of you that have heard me speak, I am a huge advocate of maintaining a vegetated shoreline buffer. They don't have to be, extensive. 5 feet would be very helpful. 10 feet, perfect. And if you already have some erosion, you can use coconut fiber logs to address some of that erosion. This is not going to address severe erosion, but this is a way of creating a temporary stable edge, backfill plant within that. Most of you are familiar with those coconut logs, right? No? Okay. So they come in different diameters, any from 8 inches to 24 inches, typically in 20-foot lengths, all right? And then you can stake those along the edge of your property. If you've got some erosion that's occurred at the edge of the lake, you can stake that in, and you can actually bore into them with a drill and actually plant within them. But the coconut fiber logs probably will degrade maybe in about 5 to 7 years or so. But over that time, it provides you with that stable edge. Then you plant behind it, plant within it, and it's a good way of addressing edge erosion in a very, a very cost-effective manner. Just an interesting sideline. So that picture up on the left-hand side, okay, that's a lake community down in Ocean County. And I got involved with that property owner because he was sued and taken to court by the Homeowners Association, which required every property adjacent to the lake, and it's just a big retention pond, so it's a glorified retention pond, but every home adjacent to the lake had to have a grass lawn. He started doing that. He was taken to court by the Property Owners Association, sued, well, taken to court, fined rather. We represented him. We won in court.
Yeah, they have to do it.
And the Property Owners Association changed their bylaws to not requiring, but recommending that you create these buffers, okay? So just like an example of how maybe one voice can stimulate a lot of change. Right? And getting back to geese, vegetated buffers are one of the best ways to decrease goose use of your lake, all right? By having even a minimal buffer. And you can see here, those geese are getting to that. That's not a high amount of vegetation. That prevents a deterrent to them because they can't see whether or not there's predators in the grass, on the other side of the grass. So when you start to get vegetation that's growing 2 to 3 feet tall, that's a deterrent to them. So that is one of the best proven ways of decreasing goose usage is by maintaining buffers along the perimeter of your lake.
But our problem is our dam has to be open, so we really can't plant this.
No, you can't do that on your dam, but you can do it on each of your properties though, too. Yeah, it's that, like I said, I mean, the problem with Canada geese is that they've become acclimated and they no longer migrate. But, like for instance, with like the Deal Lake Commission, they have an annual addling program. So they go out, they addle the eggs, they get permit from, USDA. It's lethal, but it's not really killing any existing geese. But it does make it, they come back and they nest at the same places all the time. If all of a sudden they're not being successful, they're going to move someplace else. I mean, most geese, their lifespan is about 15 to 20 years. So if they're not generating, successful hatch, they're going to go someplace else. But yes.
We did a goose removal about 8 years ago, 62 geese.
Yeah.
I myself personally will go out and addle all the eggs.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had baby geese in probably 7 years.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys heard that, but they have been engaged in both a goose removal and an egg addling program, and they have not had problems with geese for like 7 years or so, almost 7 years. Yes.
Cormorants cause the same problem.
Yeah, cormorants they're dirty, but here's the problem with geese. Why they make such a problem, because they feed up on the land. And then they take all of those nutrients and they put them into the water, either directly or because of all of their feces along the land that then gets washed in. Mm-hmm. Ducks and cormorants, it's a closed loop. They're getting their food from within the lake, and yeah, they're pooping back into the lake. But the problem isn't as significant as like carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus transfer from upland into aquatic. And that's where the geese are a special problem. Yes?
We have to promote a goose dinner at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Go back to the original
Yeah.
settlers, go with geese, not turkeys.
And discourage, don't feed the geese. A lot of people, they still feed the geese and then they wonder why we have a beach closure because of elevated coliform concentrations, A lot of times we're our own enemy. But let me kind of move along. I want to show you some of these community-based examples, starting with some retrofits, and then we're going to build into some bigger applications. But, we can do things, and I'm going to show you examples that are happening around the Clover Lake area, as well as like Lake Apatcong. But, you know, this is a project that goes back to the early maybe about 1995, 2000 or so, where the Lake Apatcon Commission went out and did just some simple retrofits. So didn't even change the boxes. All they did is altered how long water is trapped within each one of those boxes. And by doing so, they just hold back sediment. So yes, they do have to be cleaned out. There's maintenance. All that sediment that was entering the lake now gets trapped in that catch basin. But each one of those inserts is only about $800. So it's not, you know, that's a low-cost example. Around Culver Lake, and this is a perfect example of a public-private partnership. Okay, so through the Conservation Foundation, well, first off, I ended up modeling the watershed. I identified some of the worst drainage areas and what catch basins were associated with those in terms of the amount of pollutants that are entering the lake. But in any event, what happened is that the foundation purchases these inserts. These are basically big filters. They cost maybe about $1,500 a piece. The town puts them in, and the town maintains them. So public-private partnership. And why? We encourage the town to do that because they can get points for MS4 compliance. Now they can go back to the state and say, we have done like X number of retrofits. We clean these out 2 times a year, and they get points for that. So, and these are capable, as long as they're maintained, of removing about, and this was, you know, by actual measurement, about 99% of the suspended sediment that enters those filters gets trapped. So as long as they're being maintained, they do a great job of removing pollutants, but yet allowing water to flow, you know, and not backing up into the storm sewer. Go ahead.
Do you need permits to do that if you already have storm drains? Would you want to update them with?
Nope, no permits needed for that. I mean, if it's public roads though, you're gonna need.
Private roads.
No, you don't need a permit for any of that.
So you can update your own?
Yep, update your own. Yes.
So where is this placed in Culver? Is it in
Here you
the
go.
drains?
Yes. So this is a catch basin, all right, conventional catch basin. Basically, the grate is popped off, all right. These do have to be designed specifically, you know, there's some of them that come off the shelf. But, you know, most of the catch basins around Culver Lake are like probably what you find in most lake communities. They're not uniform, all right. So that's what adds to some of the cost. But it's basically just a aluminum frame with this heavy-duty filter bag in it. And yeah, the town just pops the top off of the catch basin, inserts the filter, and puts the grate back on top of it, and that's it.
And that's it.
And that's it. And then to maintain it, what they do is they come through with a vacuum truck, pop the top off of it, vacuum it out, and go on their merry way.
So, a suggestion that had been made to us is using in the drain, this wasn't suggested for sure, like a charcoal.
Yeah, like a biochar. Yeah. Right, so biochar, you gotta be careful with the biochar itself, all right? Because there's some that are designed for agricultural use and actually generate phosphorus. Okay, so you have to make sure you're using a biochar that will absorb phosphorus in heavy metals, all right? The biochar works great. It's going to be one-dimensional, though. It's going to absorb nutrients. It's designed to absorb dissolved pollutants. So that's a great addition, particularly if you don't have a lot of sediment problems, but you have a nutrient problem to deal with.
Now we got the sediment.
But that is a really good technique. But you need to be careful because again, like at Culver, I looked at a couple of different options, and we had one option that was being evaluated, but it was an ag-related biochar that actually generates phosphorus. So you've got to be careful with that. Okay, kind of moving along. This is a rain garden that was done at Culver Lake. Again, this is a public-private partnership. This is what I would call a village project, though. You'll see in a second why I'm saying that. But all they did is they just took some grassed areas adjacent to the parking lot in front of the clubhouse and took out all the lawn and replaced it with a wildflower rain garden, all right? And if you look at that plaque, I know you guys are not going to be able to see this, but that's all part of the team. So we had Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, we had the the community themselves, the Wallkill watershed group, Sussex County MUA, Rutgers University, Chris Abrupto. So, an example of a project that can be done. And that's one of the things with Rutgers. They will come out and help private lakes, all right? You just have to ask. But they will help. This is another rain garden installation, a little bit larger, that was done at Wesley Lake, which is part of Asbury Park. So now we're talking about a pretty urban, highly urbanized area. And you can see before and after. And all this work was done by, by the community. They did almost all of the planting themselves with some guidance from Princeton Hydro and some assistance from the town. But that was a conventional detention basin, all right? And they converted that into a rain garden. And that takes runoff from a bus parking lot of transit area. This is another cool example. This was also done at Deer Lake. This is in Ocean Township. This was done with some assistance from, Dr. Abrupta. But here, basically, this is just a simple curb cut. So if you look at this, so all that was done here, here's your curb and gutter. A cut was made in the curb to direct runoff that's coming down this road into this was lawn before, into this little area that then was converted into a little rain garden. And because there was a sidewalk adjacent to it and it needed more volume to handle all of this runoff, volume in terms of capacity, there's a little under drain that brings it to another section on the other side of the walkway. So simple curb cut, a little bit of planting. I don't think that probably costs the probably to install more than a couple of $1,000. Simple way of dealing with a small chunk of runoff. And then if you do have detention basins in your watershed, so most of you that have larger watersheds and more watersheds that have been developed for quite a period of time, you're going to find these conventional type of detention basins, but they can be converted. And like I said, they do an okay job at detaining runoff, but they don't do much of anything to treat or recharge runoff. Okay, that's because of those compacted soils, the grass, that concrete low flow channel. Keep in mind, engineers love these concrete low flow channels. So you see this is just a channel that's at the bottom of this detention basin, all right? What does this channel do? I get my first flush of a storm. That has the highest pollutant load, the highest concentration of pollutants. It enters the basin and exits the basin with zero treatment. Okay, zero treatment. So the new regulations, stormwater regulations, prohibits the implementation of basins like this. But they're still being constructed. Why? Because you'll get like DPW saying, well, if it's like soggy down here, it's difficult for our guys to get in and mow. Well, first off, don't mow it. Naturalize it. You're going to save all the time and money associated with mowing. And there's documentation showing, literature showing that some towns are saving now upwards of about $15,000 to $50,000 a year by just allowing their basins to become naturalized and not mowing them any longer. And that means now DPW can go out and do other projects that need assistance. So anyhow, there are ways to alter these, and there's funding available for this too, again through 319. This is a 319 project. This particular location, this is almost in my backyard, Clausen Park in East Amwell, Ringo's, but conventional detention basin, all right? You can see basically what would happen after a rainfall event. You see that little house up on the top left-hand side? So that's a conventional detention basin after a 1-inch storm. Water would just sit there because the basin bottom was compacted. All we did is come in, excavate those soils, integrate into them a lot of organic material. This was not a remove the soil and replace it, but just amending the soils. And this is the same basin, all right? And this basin conversion was done probably in 2015. And this is a picture that I probably took last summer. But you can see that house up there? That's the tip of the house, all right? This is just a naturalized basin. And there's no standing water in that basin any longer because the soils are permeable, the plants are there, and they suck all that water up. These are some examples at Deal Lake. We put in these bioinfiltration basins. This is another one of these, like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The golf course had a problem with standing water on one of their fairways. That water then just drained over to the lake. We had some grant money, worked with the town, and said, hey, we can put in these infiltration basins. This is done right alongside the cart path, didn't interfere with the fairway, keeps that fairway dry now. Golf course is happy, Deal Lake is happy. This is another example. This is at Manalapan Lake down in central New Jersey. These were conventional parking lot medians, and all we did was just, rather than have them, convex, dig them out, make them concave, and then plant them with a variety of different types of wildflower. There is this control structure there. It does hold back water, but all of that runoff previously, undetained, would just go down to the storm drain and then down into the lake. Here now this runoff gets intercepted. This is just curb cuts that were done, and just by making this like a hollow, we can retain a lot of that runoff and treat it and put it back down into the ground without it exiting the lake. And there's plenty of examples, of those types of conversions. Some of you may be familiar with tree boxes. These are used in more urban applications, but you can use this as a way of, again, with catch basins, to convert catch basins, conventional basins, into more stormwater friendly type of treatment devices. So this is an example of a tree box installation. Some of you can go out and look at this. This is at the police and court complex right off of Route 46. So this drains to Forge Pond, but this is blanking out on the name of the town.
Parsippany?
Parsippany, yeah. So this is at the Parsippany Police and Court facility. And essentially this was grant money. This was through 10 towns in Great Swamp. But basically all we did was look for where water moves and then took 3 or 4 of the existing conventional basins and replaced them with these tree boxes, okay? And then to help move water to the basins that we wanted to convert, we just put in these speed bumps. And all those speed bumps did was they serve as little gutters, and they just push the water into the basins that we wanted to have some treatment done. Simple type of thing, all right? It's another example. This is a project that I did down in Ocean County Park in Lakewood. Tree boxes that were put in adjacent to Swimming Lake, and all this does is just collect runoff from the parking lot. You don't have to plant it with a tree. You can plant it with everything. It's not really the vegetation that does most of the work. Most of the work is done by the soil media, okay? Which does need to be replaced maybe once every 5 to 7 years or so. But you can plant them just about with anything. Yes?
On that slide, I see a storm drain just be.
Which one?
The picture.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Could you just explain how that works?
Yeah, so previously what was happening was all of the runoff just would go to that drain, okay? Now what happens is that during the small events, the ones that I'm mostly concerned about, gets intercepted by that tree box first, and if we do have a larger event, okay, that exceeds the capacity of that tree box, then it goes into that other drain.
How does the water get into the tree box from the?
Yeah,
Great.
There's an opening here.
Okay.
So it basically comes in, gets into the tree box, and then this is under drain. So if you look at this cutaway, you'll see there's like an under drain in it. And so as that water permeates down through that media, it gets treated and then it gets shunted back out to the lake. But in this particular application, whoops, where am I going here? Whoops. Yeah. So in this particular application, we couldn't put a box in that was large enough to, this is a large parking lot. This is probably over 1.5 acres. But it'll deal with the runoff from the 1-year event, but anything bigger will bypass it and then go into where it all used to collect anyhow. You can go larger scale. So this is what's called a manufactured treatment device. These techniques are also in the BMP manual. But essentially with these devices, it's a concrete box. This is a pretty small one. This is at Sunset Lake. This is in Asbury Town, city of Asbury once again. But it's managing runoff from about 6 or 8 catch basins at this like highly traversed intersection. And basically the way this works is that the water enters, you see this, the water enters here, okay? This device is called a helical swirl condenser. Fancy word for just something that spins the water, slows it down, and causes the sediment to settle out. And then each one of those baffles, there's actually a slit at the bottom of the baffle. So the box will fill up, and then over time it'll drain out. Okay, this is sized once again for the 1-year storm. Bigger storms are going to bypass it. So here you can sort of get a sense of the bypass. So water would come in. This is that same installation. Water would come in. Eventually this is going to have a knockout here, but water comes in. If there's larger events that this can't handle, it'll bypass this system. What's treated will come through and then exit out into the lake. But in some cases, you don't have the capacity to build something that is large enough to deal with all the storms. But that allows you to, it removes a lot of particulate pollutants, not so much dissolved, but a lot of particulate pollutants. This is a larger installation. This was done at Harvey's Lake, which is out in Pocono area of Pennsylvania. That basin went in, and within 4 months, it had already removed 8 tons of sediment that otherwise were entering the lake. Okay. This is a large MTD installation. You can get a sense of how big this box is. And I was explaining, we just put in another set of these around Deal Lake, which is about 1/3. If you took this half of the room, about 1/3 the size of this, what we're sitting in right now, where everybody's sitting. About 2/3 of that is under the ground, managing runoff. This one's a little bit smaller, but it's still pretty big, and that removes over about 3 tons of sediment per quarter. So yes, the city of Asbury Park does come in, they clean these out, they will put in with grant money, but all of that trash, litter, floatables, we're in a highly urbanized area, all of that was entering the lake, and they were spending tons of time as part of the lake, lake cleanups, getting rid of all of that trash. So now Deal Lake probably has about, last count, I would say 4 of these big structures, and people would walk by, you wouldn't even know that they were there. You just see manhole covers and, Another example of public-private partnership, this is another project done at Culver Lake. These are some small-scale alum injectors. We've got 2 of these in right now. This was, again, these were purchased by the foundation. The reason why it's public-private is that we did have to make some minor alterations to the catch basin. It's a pretty big catch basin that this discharges to. So we had to get the town's approval to do that. They don't really need to maintain anything, but that is an example of something else that can be done to decrease phosphorus loading. And right here at Lake Mohawk, it's a project that went in, I think, maybe 2007, 2008, if I remember correctly, Sabine? Okay. This is at Beach 6. This was a DEP 319H funded project, okay, done in combination with assistance from Sparta Township. So yes, we needed their approval to do this. They became part of the grant, they were part of the grant application, but we're able to, put in an alum injector on one of the storm sewer systems. There's actually 2 of them in on this lake. Yeah, Mike?
On that previous slide with is that also contained, it's solar powered?
This one's solar powered.
Is it triggered on like a rain gauge type
Yeah,
of thing?
so it's got a tipping bucket, and then this is designed to deal with the 1-inch rain.
Right.
So, that tipping bucket fills up, and then it triggers the pump. The pump runs for a specific amount of time that's all been computed based on how much alum we want to get out into into that storm flow.
Now, could something like that be used in a stream, upstream from off each 2 entrance to put it by like the A field?
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, you already have one that is...
We're injecting into the mouth of the stream right at the...
Right, right. You could do that, right. You could definitely do that.
Would that be something that we could apply for, or it's all private?
Yeah.
And then
You'd have to go into like, either with a foundation, a 501(c), or you could do it as a public-private partnership with the town. Okay? And so, yeah, we get down to the end of this, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. Where's all this money come from? Well, first off, that 319H program is, this has like been what I would consider like a gold mine for the lake communities, particularly public lakes. But it is about 10 to maybe 13 million per year that comes from the EPA through the Clean Water Act to the state. And then the state then, it's a very competitive program. They'll issue a call for proposals, and then they'll fund projects. And typically they'll do maybe about 5, depending on, they normally get about like 10 times more applications than they can fund. But in any event, they'll usually, fund maybe about 5 to 10 projects annually. 501(c)(3)s, or C3, 501(c)(3)s rather, can also apply for that money. Okay, yeah.
We are a private lake, right?
Yep.
And Anthony mentioned Mr. Sears on the town, in the town, and he brought to our attention some of these huge grants. Last year there were 2 grants. One of them was $4 million, the other one was $7 million.
Yeah.
When I tell you we checked off every single box to qualify for one of those grants, except that we were a private lake. And the town told us it won't happen. Now you keep using this term public-private partnership. Does that exist? Is that a real term?
Oh yeah,
We're told we're private. The answer is no.
Here's the thing though, the town would have to apply for the grant, okay?
They wouldn't even let us use their grant writer. We were going to apply and pay for all the fees.
See, this is where you have to educate them as to why this is beneficial to them, okay? And I wouldn't call it free money, but it is money that can be applied to address stormwater-related problems. And that's where the majority of the money is spent by the state. They fund stormwater-related projects. That could be bank and bed stabilization of streams, as well as projects like this, where we're actually collecting and treating stormwater runoff. Okay.
We just, guys,
yeah.
Where we are, we have a small lake right past College, and it's Kinnison.
Yeah.
We have state land on one side, and we have federal land on the other. So all the runoff that we have feeds into our lake, and then our runoff goes underneath 206 and feeds into state land and the flood zone. So, we have no help or anything.
Yeah.
We can't even get the state to trim their brush on the side of the road, let alone this, because most of our runoff is off the state land.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's an easy road to go down. You have to be creative. You have to have a lot of homework done. For every one of these projects that I'm showing you, I had done a watershed analysis. I could point to what was causing the problem, what the sources of the problems were, in why these projects would help alleviate some of that. But you need to have the when you're in a private lake, you need buy-in from the town, or like what, Mohawk has done and what Culver has done. They have a nonprofit, and nonprofits can apply for 319H money. Okay?
They are not.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that we work with you to do those, loading bases that we
Yeah.
do with the town.
It's right there. I
We
already
pay
wrote it down.
for your services and the town did the work.
Yeah.
We got the grant.
Right, you just have to
They've
be,
done a lot of work, 'cause I think they really just clean that floating basin and
Yeah.
don't clean all the upstream storm drains.
right.
Because it all flows to
It
there,
flows
and
into
they
that
catch
one.
it all there.
Yeah, it makes it easier for them.
It's easier for them forever,
Yeah.
and, we got that done, and it's been working well.
All right, so just, because I've already run out of time, but, these are different sources of money, but also, look at Rutgers Extension Service, the Wallkill Watershed Management Group. They have been helping lake communities in this section of the state for a long time. They're a great resource that you should tap into. I mentioned this whole thing about MS4 compliance, and this is very important because to me, this provides the legal mechanism to, sort of get towns to think about, okay, yeah, we have a requirement to fulfill. This might be like a low-hanging fruit type of project that we could implement that would help us demonstrate compliance. And I'm sorry, that should be 715, not 713. And so just like in summary, we've got, our stormwater management paradigm for lake communities should be, number one, we recognize that non-point source pollution is the biggest problem that we have to address. And if I can do anything to decrease the amount of phosphorus loading and sediment loading using green infrastructure techniques, it's going to benefit my lake. But in order to do that, we want to make sure that we start off thinking of runoff as a resource, manage small amounts. You can't take, for green infrastructure to work properly, you can't take 50 acres and drain it to like a little rain garden. It's not going to work. So you need to understand your watershed, divide and conquer, and then also look for techniques that can be done to eliminate or reduce runoff, or at least decrease the pollutant load that's associated with that runoff. And then find easy to implement small scale ways to collect and treat that. So source control, eliminate the problem or reduce the problem. In delivery control, I treat the problem. And when you can do that, then maybe you can take some of the bite out of your stormwater problems. Okay, sorry I took more time than allotted.